All right, good afternoon. My name is Oz Erdem, Chairman of National DEC, and I welcome you to another episode of our International Trade and Exporting webinar series. I'm hoping you all can hear me. Well, since we decided to cancel our annual export conference this year, we thought it would be better to continue educating exporting community virtually and increase the number of our webinars. There are certainly a large number of subjects to cover in these webinars, we will today try to cover a very critical, very important subject to our exporting community. That is China's Belt and Road Initiative and its update on its business, national security, and geopolitical impacts. So we have two distinguished panelists with us today. Both of them are very experienced and experts in doing business in China and in overall Asia. They're very familiar with the political climate in Asia. David Day, who is also the chairman of the National DEC Trade Policy Committee, and Christina Lun. Before moving forward, I'd like to give some logistics related information. So you will all be on mute during this webinar. Please use the button on your screen which says Q&A for your questions, and we will try to cover those questions at the end of the webinar. If because of bandwidth problems, there's a disconnect or you cannot hear the speakers well, please try to relog in. First of all, I would like to personally thank everybody who put together this webinar series, our Education Committee Chair, Andrea Rete, our Vice Chair, Sean Lefson, for his support in infrastructure. He's in the background now. And finally, our panelists, Christina and David. Let me briefly introduce Dr. Christina Lun here. Christina Lun is a historian of international relations with emphasis on America's interactions with the developing world. She serves as Trade Policy and Liaison Officer for the Missouri DEC and is one of our National DEC at-large directors, where she's a member of both the Trade Policy and Education Committees. Interestingly, for the purposes of this program, Christina began her foreign policy career as a very young staff assistant at the National Security Council, where she coordinated the interagency process for the president's trip to China, including preparation of books, talking points, and has overseen the development of the first ever pre-trip video briefing using CIA and other US government resources. So, Dr. Lun, if you're ready, I will turn it over to you. And once again, thank you for supporting us, our DEC members, and exporting community.
Thank you, Oz. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay, great. Thanks everyone for joining us today. I feel that we kind of have a captive audience. I hope it's worth your time. When we talked about doing this series on the Belt and Road Initiative, it was long before anybody had heard of the coronavirus, this version of it, much less the impact in China. But the development of that as a phenomenon has only added to the complexity of this issue and makes it even more significant. I'm not going to belabor this at this point because we want to make sure we have lots of time for Q&As. But first I want to just give you a little bit of introductory information about David Day, who really is the brain behind this information. So David is an international lawyer by profession, and he's co-chair of the Trade Policy Committee of the National DEC. He's one of our National DEC directors from the Pacific South region of the US, which encompasses Nevada, Central and Southern California, Hawaii, and the US Trust Territories of the Pacific. Interestingly, for the purposes of this program, David's also the chairman of the American Bar Association's Belt and Road Task Force and has given a number of presentations on the Belt and Road here in the US as well as in Asia. So without further ado, David, I'm turning it over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Christina. And it's a real privilege for both Christina and I to join all of you today on this important topic. I just have two introductory comments here. The first is that you're looking at an unusual art piece, which was created by the Chinese contemporary artist Xu Yong in connection with the first conference held in Beijing for the Belt and Road in 2015. And you have to appreciate that this art piece stands some 28 meters long, 4 meters wide, and 6 meters high. And this is comprised of approximately 20,000 artificial amber blocks, which the artist was trying to symbolize bridging with the countries of the world, and the concept of let 100 flowers bloom, which I'm sure you've heard before. And let me just point out one interesting piece here. You see this bridge just doesn't connect anywhere. And I would submit that all of you that are participating in this webinar have been impacted already by the Belt and Road, or if not, you will be, and your grandchildren and grandchildren's grandchildren will be. And so that is one of the educational pieces that we hope you will understand by the time we get to the conclusion of this program. So stay with us. You'll need to concentrate. We're going to deliver a lot of information, and fortunately, we have a fabulous host and moderator in Christina to help us do that. So Christina, I'm back over to you.
Thank you. Next slide, please. Thank you. So one of the important things is understanding China in the big picture. And I think it would be really helpful, David, if you kind of gave us a quick overview of how we got here with China.
Well, always remember that when you develop a country, you're doing it in two phases. Stage one is an infrastructure development, and we had this in our own country with the development, for instance, of the Transcontinental Railroad and our telecommunication system and so forth. And this exporting system has allowed, or infrastructure development has allowed China to export, and this generates fast money. And please understand, all of you need to understand that China has a dual monetary system, and it must export to generate dollars in order to fund its international projects. And so the two phases are infrastructure development and human capital development. Well, human capital development is that area of homegrown value-added innovation where you get away from infrastructure and building empty cities, and you get into the creative side and the institutions that support that. And China has some real structural challenges to get into this second phase of development because its institutions were built, if you recall, for an agrarian society. And so it has these ossified Leninist models for governance, its bureaucracy and economic development, which don't allow it to get into the second phase here. And so this first stage of infrastructure development is really where the Belt and Road comes in, because it's just an extension. It's what they know how to do well. And the other piece that I will point out is that China's development is in some ways a facade. That is, you do have this fabulous skyscrapers and beautiful glass buildings and high-speed rail, but you have to remember that the back end, as you get into outside the urban cities and so forth, has all kinds of challenges. The other piece I want to point out to you is this, if you can picture the map of China superimposed over the United States, what you get, the land area is roughly the same, but the population of China is very, very dense. It's compressed into an area. If you drew a line from Maine to Chicago to Dallas and over to Miami, imagine 4 times the population of the United States crammed in that very small area. So you've got this intense compression of its population. And then what's happened over the last 20 years or so is that China has become far more interconnected with the world. And so in its development in 2003, as an example, depending on how you measure the numbers, approximately 7 million Chinese from the People's Republic of China used international airline flights. And if we fast forward to 2019, that number jumps 10 times to approximately 68, 70 million people. And there are other statistics that are much more liberal than the ones I've just cited to you, but the difference in interconnectedness is just incredible. So that's kind of the picture of the way that China has been developing and still operating in that first stage of infrastructure development.
So before we go on, if Sean is there, we want to know kind of who everybody is, what your knowledge base, your experience. So we have a couple of questions we'd just like you to quickly answer. It should have popped up on your screen. First one is, have you been to China? And while you all are filling out these 2 poll questions, David, can you kind of tee us up for just what exactly is the Belt and Road?
Sure. Well, it's important to understand that the Belt and Road is just a massive hard and digital infrastructure development strategy, and it includes some 100+ countries globally. And what's very important here is to understand that this Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI, has become the crown jewel of Xi Jinping's foreign policy. But it's also been engraved into China's 13th five-year plan. It's now part of the constitution of the Communist Party, and it's now been enshrined in China's national constitution as of October of 2017. And if we could go to the next slide, I think some of this we can emphasize this a little better to all of you. But one of the things that China has been doing is moving its borders outward. And you all can see this in a small way as China's movement into the South China Sea, for instance. But the big picture is that China is using the BRI, or the Belt and Road, to build spheres of influence which bind the receiving country to China, both politically, economically, militarily, and culturally. And so you see this with this infrastructure development, that what's happened is that in the transportation area, you see highways, railways, logistics centers, and cargo areas, seaports being built and operated by Chinese companies or Sino-host country joint ventures in which China plays a leading role. And in the other fields of telecommunications and e-commerce, financial, monetary, media, and of course the new immigrant neighbors, all of these are areas that China has become very, very influential globally. And these new immigrant neighbors, what's happening is you get thousands and tens of thousands and so on of new Chinese neighbors who come into the host country to work on setting up these projects and then not go home. And so as an example of that, you have very substantial Chinese immigrants into both legal and illegal into Italy, as an example, one of our coronavirus countries. And to date, the number is approximately 3 million in the Republic of the Philippines. So the Belt and Road is a huge undertaking by China to essentially to restore China to its position, somewhat like the Middle Kingdom as the center of the world in terms of commerce.
Great. Sorry, we're having a little technical challenge here. I believe the the first question was who all had been to China, and 70% of the attendees have been and 30% not. And it's interesting to know why everyone is interested in the Belt and Road Initiative and what experience level you have, whether it's been directly or if you visited. So thanks for that. So David, moving ahead, because we have a lot to get to, we know that the Belt and Road, even in its short history, has changed. Tell me, can you tell us a little bit about how it's changed?
Well, if we could go to the next slide, and I think that what you missed on the previous slide, I just noticed, there were a lot of unstated objectives to the Belt and Road, and you see a number of things there, points that what China is attempting to accomplish, including the geopolitical influence aspects of it. And let me point out one thing before we go to the next slide, and then I'll answer your question, Christina, is that the geopolitical influence is extended into the United Nations. So if you research recent history, you'll see no condemnation of China regarding its handling of the Uyghur situation. And we will see further influence of China in the way that the WHO has handled this whole coronavirus situation. So let's go to the next slide here, if we can, just to answer your question, Christina. Originally, the Belt and Road, if you go on the internet, it looks like this, but that is a picture of the Belt and Road that's what I call very primitive. In fact, if you go on the internet and you really research the Belt and Road, you will not see the picture of the Belt and Road that we are creating for you here, because we haven't been able to find it. And so we've done a global mapping of what the true picture of the Belt and Road looks like. And so if we go to the next slide, that's because there is now some 152 countries that have signed on to this initiative, Christina. And of course, some of those are not Belt and Road, they're just China financed projects. And those are some of the ones you see in North America. And then if we go to the next slide for all of you, one of the things that it's not likely that you'll see is that the Pacific Island nations that have joined the Belt and Road by way of a map. And so we've depicted this for you here. Let me just point out, Christina, that American Samoa not American, Samoa, not American Samoa. One of the things that's interesting about this is that China is spending a fair amount of money to redo their international airport, and Samoa has very few tourists that come there. And I would just point out to those of you interested in national security matters that Samoa is approximately 4 hours by jet due south of the command headquarters of the United States military at Pearl Harbor and Camp Smith, 4 hours out. And they have been spending a lot of money on an airport there. And we could talk about the other Pacific islands as well. But if we go into the Caribbean countries, you see the Belt and Road swoops through Central America and picks up a number of the Caribbean countries. And then if we go on into Latin America, the next slide, what you will see is that virtually all of the significant countries of Latin America are now part of the BRI. And while Colombia and Argentina are not officially on board, they have announced that they will be this year. And Brazil is not, has not yet committed, but China has made tremendous investments in Brazil. And I think that China is Brazil's main trading partner, and they've just done a $1 billion investment in the port of São Luís. And so I think that basically when you go south of the US border, we have, of the significant countries in terms of commercial and business, we have Mexico. And of course, Panama was the first of the Central American and Latin American countries to join the Belt and Road. And if we go look at the next slide into the African continent, Christina, we all know that China has made very serious inroads into Africa, and those countries that have already joined on board the Belt and Road are shown in red. And if we go to the next slide in Europe, we've seen movement into Europe, and focus there, if you will, on Italy. Notice that Italy is a Belt and Road country. They are the first of the G7. So that the picture here, if we go to the next slide, even includes the Arctic. And so there is this Arctic Silk Road for those of you in Canada who are on this webinar. The Arctic Silk Road joins China and Europe, and this is the Arctic leg that I think is pretty significant here. So I think the picture, if we go to the next slide on the BRI, is something that we're going to have to deal with, those of us in the North American continent. And this is why the USMCA, sorry, I almost used the word NAFTA, becomes very important. And that is the area in the yellow oval there, Christina. And the rest of the world, big chunks of it are committed onto this Belt and Road project.
So David, you've done a fantastic job of really kind of helping us visualize using maps just where China's reach is and through the Belt and Road. But one thing that has changed and is really important is that what about digital? Because digital is something that has changed over the years. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that there wasn't really a digital world. It's today is brought to you by the digital world. How does the Belt and Road Initiative reflect what's going on in the digital world? What are the implications?
Well, if we could go to the next visual here, the next slide, on the digital Silk Road, what you essentially have is the creation with the servers in China of a massive infrastructure. And look at the red line on that map as China closes the gap in R&D expenditures, with the yellow or orange line being the United States, passing up a number of other countries. So there is this project called Made in China 2025. And the concept there is that China would be standing on the shoulders of giants. Now, that is a phrase that means essentially, Christina, that China can take advantage of the IP developed, the intellectual property developed by other countries, and use it for their own benefit. And the idea is the Made in China 2025 is that by 2025, China will be the paramount leader in digital matters. And so the process that has been developed in large part to get there is through this intellectual property theft, hacking, surveillance, data control that all of you have seen. And along with the BRI, the concept is that China would then be the supplier of the technical infrastructure and service. And so basically what you get here is a concept which we call digital colonialization, meaning China is the middle kingdom and is the controlling power of the digital infrastructure of all of these countries, which depending on how you measure it, are about in 150 countries around the world. I will point out one interesting piece here, that one of our DEC members has a project starting in Africa, working with one of the premier companies, intellectual property, computer software companies in the US, to do workarounds around the Huawei system, 5G networks that have been set up in one of the African countries. And it's a fantastic project supported by the US Exim Bank.
I'm glad you mentioned Huawei, and that would obviously be something we could spend a great deal of time on, but it does lend itself to understanding just how important this issue is for a Chinese company like Huawei to have so much control of the infrastructure, the digital infrastructure around the world. But moving on, so David, what's the U.S. response to this?
Well, the U.S. response, if we go to the next slide, has been to really mobilize or attempt to mobilize our private sector, both the U.S. and its allies. And so the big change is that, you know, there's been on the military side, there's been a freedom of navigation operations fired up throughout the South China Sea, which many of you have seen. China's been disinvited to participate in the RIMPAC exercises out in the Pacific this coming summer. But there's been a first time a commercial side of the national security strategy, with the phrase being used that economic security is national security. And so, you know, in line with that, we've seen renegotiated trade agreements. And I do want to point out that the US-China trade war has been a piece of the response. And why is that? It's because the trade war has slowed China down a bit, because they haven't been able to export quite as much, and they need to export with their economy because they have a dual monetary system, as we pointed out before. And if they can't export, they can't earn dollars. If they can't earn dollars, it's tough for them to make some of these international investments. And there's been some new legislation passed in the United States to bolster our tool chest. And I want all of you that are participating in this program to follow with us, because the United States and its allies can use some creative help and an additional strategy. And so maybe you've got another great idea to help here.
Great. So as the U.S. figures out how to respond to this, what kind of tools do we have?
Well, that would be the next slide for all of you. And I want to point out that this is a work in progress. And again, we are going to be soliciting ideas and help at the conclusion of this program from every one of you that are participating. And I'm not going to go through this checklist, but this is what the current U.S. tool chest looks like. And the key here is of the U.S. strategy is to begin to create not only this whole of government, but a whole of society. And the last time because this is what it's going to take to effectively block this Belt and Road. Remember, the Belt and Road is a project that goes for several decades. It's not just something that's going to happen the next couple of years here. And in order to participate or to compete effectively, it's going to require a whole of society approach to this. And I do want to emphasize that this is a work in progress. And we should talk about, Christina, I think, this new BUILD Act and the International Development Finance Corporation. And we'll do that in a minute. But let's turn to a very important piece, and that's the private sector here. And this is really the key component of the Belt and Road, and it's because a core strategy of the United States has been to really do what it can to mobilize its private sector, which has a lot of experience, assets, and knows how to do this rather than just aid projects. And I think that important to understand that final point there, American soft power, and that is our private sector links with foreign governments. And you can see the picture. I mean, I'm sure many of you have your own pictures, but this is just a conversation with the Deputy to Prime Minister Abe in Japan on some aspects of the Belt and Road that we were blessed to be able to participate in.
David,
so this is, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just about to ask, what role do global trading blocs, or can they play in our response to the Belt and Road Initiative?
Well, the global trading blocs provide opportunities to really work with each other and build lower tariff barriers and increase the trade, so that we're not overly reliant on one country or a couple of countries. And so the important trading bloc that is in the home stretch here is the art piece that you see in front of you, and that's the USMCA between the United States, Mexico, and Canada. Mexico took the lead, if you recall, Christina, ratified, and then the US has just followed. And now we're looking at Canada, and we have this is a very important, well-integrated trading bloc that is very, very strong, and I have every confidence that China will ultimately ratify and be on board with us.
Great. You mentioned that you were going to touch a little bit more on a couple of the key tools that the U.S. had. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think the one that I think all of you should know about is this new BUILD Act, which was passed during the height of acrimony during the Kavanaugh hearings. And this is an effort to mobilize the private sector in a different type of investment vehicle, and was specifically designed to compete with China's predatory lending and finance programs. And the interesting thing is that U.S. investors are given a preference, but are not required for this. And the concept is to really crowdfund vitally needed private sector funding. And this new IDFC is now up and flying. It has a $60 billion initial funding. It's just a start. It becomes operating, can take an equity position just like an investment banker. So this is a new, very creative and powerful tool that the United States has created.
Great. So you've done just a great job, again, of kind of this overview of the BRI to date and some of the key tools that the U.S. government has to address the BRI. But what role does, kind of looking at home and what's happened in the last couple of years, what about this relationship between the U.S. and China? There's an effort to build out a trade deal, and we have a first phase. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, sure. If we go to the next slide here, we're talking about the phase one of the China trade deal. And let me emphasize here that this is phase one and what phase two is going to look like. But here's the important piece for everyone, that we are not going to see trade agreements with China like our other allies that go on for years. What we're going to see in the future are a series of contracts or accommodations. And so these are some of the general points of the existing phase one trade deal with China, which was recently signed. And I think that this is an effort to try to level the playing field on the part of the United States, but there are some structural differences that we are not going to be able to renegotiate or get to with China. And so future negotiations may be very tough, and the trade relationship may continue to be pretty rough. We could spend a lot of time on this, Christina. I think we could spend another 2 hours on the phase one trade deal, but it's a start.
Yes. So kind of going back to the very beginning, comments about when you and I, all of us actually began talking about doing a series on the BRI, and how at that time, nobody, there was no such thing as the coronavirus pandemic. It was, but now, of course, we're deep into this. And what implications does it have for the BRI?
All right. Well, let's take a look. Let's address. I mean, that's a good question, Christina, and I think that everybody wants to know that. And so let's go to the next slide here. And so, if the last major pandemic was the SARS incident, and that was largely contained within Southeast Asia. And the reason that it was largely contained within Southeast Asia was because in 17 years ago, China was not nearly as interconnected with the world as it is today. And so that contact, always remember now what we talked about at the beginning of this program, that despite the brass, the glass, and all the beautiful infrastructure, there is a developing country aspect to parts of China that have to do with weak public sanitation and failure to timely disclose, which sets up this black swan pandemic that we have seen around the world here. And that's part of the challenge with an authoritarian type of government, is they're not big on transparency, and so they try to cover up things. And we even have that with our own country and others, but the situation in China has been really acute. And so that's compounded with a problem with the World Health Organization. And the World Health Organization has its Director General Tedros compound this disclosure delay with China and accelerating the spreading of this virus. And I think that it's important that everybody know that the BRI sets up a serious financial conflict of interest within Director General Tedros of the World Trade Organization, the World Health Organization, and his home country of Ethiopia. And that's because China helped Tedros get elected as the WHO director in 2017, and the Ethiopian economy has been largely dependent on China's investments in Belt and Road projects. So on the Italian situation, what's happened is that in an effort to appease China, what Italy has done, as an example, is, and you saw the visual flash by your eyes very quickly there, what happened is that in Italy is that the Italian mayor of Florence instituted a program with its Italian immigrants there called Hug a Chinese. Well, this was in in early February of this year. And that has contributed to the spread of the coronavirus in Italy big time. So if we go to the next slide, Christina, on the overlay of the whole Belt and Road with the coronavirus, this concept of China being the workshop of the world has been severely dented here. And after SARS in early 2000s, a fail-safe system was set up in China, was supposed to accelerate the warning system and so forth. And what happened is that because the political leadership in Wuhan wanted to cover up or delay this reporting to the big bosses in Beijing, it allowed the virus to explode in January. They also held a large meeting of the provincial party in Wuhan, some 40,000 people in January, and then they split to the four corners of China afterwards. So what's happening now is this whole challenge of having our supply chains heavily invested in China, that's all going to change now, and there'll be new markets and new opportunities. And I think that the future of the Belt and Road is, there are two views on this. One view is that China is going to take advantage of this period of time, and their economy is strong, and they'll just roll forward and do all kinds of projects in the various countries in the world because they're strong economically. That's not my view. My view is that we've got a short-term hiatus here. The US is clearly behind the power curve here. And what's happened is that we've got a severely weakened Chinese economy. And that gives the United States and its allies a chance to put up a more comprehensive response in place, get it in place to meet the challenge competitively of the Belt and Road. And the reason I have some confidence about this view is, despite the propaganda of the Communist Party, if we look at the overhead air surveillance over top of China, what you see are clear skies. Their factories have not restarted, despite what the party has said. The Chinese people, Christina, are very angry at this whole situation involving the coronavirus, because their view is they know these numbers coming out of China to be false. They know their economy has not restarted. And they're furious that the party has destroyed all the progress that was built overseas. They view it as a big screw up. Some voices have said, now we'll be way behind. Many of you saw that over the weekend there was a big riot in Wuhan. And so the idea that this virus is going to kill the Belt and Road, no. It's built into the 13th five-year plan. It's built into the foundational documents of the country. This is a long-term prospect for China, and it is a competitive business, diplomatic, geopolitical entity that we're going to have to deal with in the years to come, and so will our grandchildren.
You know, David, you asked me the other day when we were kind of working through some of these parts about what I wanted to stress or what was important to me in terms of a takeaway. And I told you then is my concern that what has happened is interpreted as a blanket failure of globalization, or it will be perceived as representing a long-term failure of America's policy towards China, that we were naive or worse. And I really believe that's the wrong takeaway.
I agree. I agree.
I think it's really important for everyone to understand that this idea of economic freedom equals political freedom is a deep-seated belief in American history. Heck, it goes all the way back to the Enlightenment writers such as John Locke and Adam Smith. But it really came to the forefront in the 20th century in the post-World War II era. We had successes. That's what we did in post-war Japan and Germany. We built,
Right.
we helped them build their economies, and that helped make it possible to have democratic institutions and processes in place. And so we believed that if we could help China as they transitioned from out from under the shadow of Mao, that the same thing would take place. So there were a lot of reasons to believe that this would work. And so that's my real concern, that the takeaway that there's a move in the US to continue to retreat from the world.
Well, I think that would be a mistake because, you don't want to have, think of your mother's advice, Christina. You never want to have all your eggs in one basket. And that's what essentially the United States has done with its trade relationship with China. And China has become the workshop of the world because it was easy, it was convenient. And it may be a little more expensive, and there may be some problems developing other areas of the world over a period of time. But I think as a country, and I include our colleagues from Mexico who are on this webinar and our colleagues from Canada who are on this webinar, it is important to remember the word diversification, and that it's okay to trade with China, but just make sure you understand who you're dealing with. Their culture is different than ours in the People's Republic of China. I exclude our colleagues from Taiwan and Hong Kong from this, and so that I think that this seething anger internally at the Communist Party is something that there may be some changes coming in the party, that the party has destroyed a lot of things, but we need to develop other markets in the world, spread the wealth around a little better, and the American private sector is fully capable of doing that. And we need to show these folks the homework slide, though, I think.
Yes.
We're going to give them some homework and then take some questions. Or do you have anything other? I mean, that's kind of my parting shot here.
No, just again, reiterating, the failure hasn't been globalization itself. That's like saying industrialization failed. That, we need policies and policymakers and civic leaders to figure out how to address some of the challenges, but retreating is not the answer.
Yeah, Christina, the challenge is this: the culture in the People's Republic of China is different than in West Germany, or Japan. And that country is not going to simply follow the American model by being close to us. We've had a 40-year exercise from the time of Jimmy Carter, where even with all the efforts of the federal government, they still are in a adversarial position if you really look very carefully at it. Okay?
Oh, yes. So let's move on and wrap this up so we can get to some of the really good questions.
Okay, why don't you go for the questions? And all of you on this webinar, we're giving you a homework assignment. And the homework assignment is give us some help here. If you've got some ideas, give us some help.
Great. Let's see. All right, we've had a number of really great questions. Well, first off, this is kind of a basic one, but it's a good one. Exactly what do you mean when you say that a country is committed to the Belt and Road Initiative?
Um, so maybe the reference was to Colombia and Argentina. Those are public statements from its key officials that they will sign on board as a Belt and Road country in 2020. And so they enter into formal agreements with the People's Republic of China.
Okay, great. What about, can you talk a little bit about Huawei and their 5G infrastructure? Why that is such an important and thorny topic and how it fits into the BRI?
Well, the Huawei system, there's quite a bit of controversy over that. But basically, the Chinese 5G networks will only support Chinese 5G compatible solutions, applications, operating systems, e-commerce platforms, e-government platforms, Internet of Things, and the national defense system, the banking system, the monetary system, the power grid, the water supply, the cold storage, and on and on and on of the BRI host country. So once a Huawei 5G network is installed, it then becomes difficult to put in a competing one next to it because the frequency bands used are so precise and so delicate that you can only have one cell site per location. So Christina, the first to occupy a key rooftop or cell site positions in any given country wins. And so now, once they do that, what you get is an avalanche of high-priced services. And think of the cost that it takes a cinema to make popcorn and what you pay for it. And so basically, a 5G provider like Huawei and its service partners in China can dominate a country's economy and how it's governed. And so along with that, you get pervasive surveillance and control, and along with the related data mining and ownership. And that's why I referenced this very important project by one of our DEC members to do a workaround or rip out of the Huawei system, because one of the African countries and others are following are starting to realize, hey, this is not what we want or what we thought we were going to get, even though it was cheapest getting underway. And I'm pleased to let all of you know that the Exim Bank has jumped on this, and it is an interesting competitive move by one of the great American high-tech companies called Cisco Systems.
Thanks. So how significant was Italy's 2.5 billion euro BRI deal with China? It feels very significant for a G7 country to join, but a lot has changed, especially with COVID-19, since the agreement was signed in 2019.
Well, the Italian hookup with China has been over many, many years, and so they have a tremendous influx in Italy of legal and illegal immigrants, and some 3,200 Italian factories in the garment and shoe industries that the brands that you all know very well, are now essentially Chinese owned and operated by Chinese labor. And so that particular deal is just one of many, many investments that China has in Italy. And its proximity between the two countries is such that Italy, this piece that I mentioned to you earlier, the hugging policy of the mayor of Florence was designed to appease China. And we see that same appeasement of China coming in other countries like Pakistan, for instance.
One near and dear to my heart. So is the USMCA going to be important to combat the BRI, and how?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And for our Mexican colleagues on this webinar, Mexico is an important ally. Canada and Mexico are our second and third, I believe, statistically trading partners with the US. And so the USMCA is critically important because that is effectively the largest, most integrated trading bloc or community in the world, and in terms of its volume. And so it is critically important as to maintain a competitive potential with China's BRI. And because, Christina, look, you recall the map that I showed you on Latin America. If you and I went down to Nogales, Arizona, we stood on the border there and we looked into Mexico, we would be looking at the only major country south of the US border that is not effectively in China's camp. All of Central America, much of the Caribbean, and all of the significant countries on the Latin American continent have now joined with China in the BRI, or they are going to join within in 2020 here. So the USMCA becomes critical.
We have time for one more question. And I encourage everyone to remember that this is just the first of a series of 3 webinars on the BRI. Final question, you mentioned that the BRI includes sending Chinese workers to projects and then they remain in the host countries. Do you see this as a trend for the Chinese workers to assimilate in the life of the host countries, or will they stay loyal to China and its objectives?
The answer to this question is yes, it's a trend to leave the workers in the host country, and no, they do not assimilate, meaning they bring in their own businesses, their own stores, their own connections with the mother country. So you effectively create the potential for some type of cultural or other friction within these various countries. And I know for my own personal experience in the Philippines, there are some 3 million Chinese that have moved into the Philippines legally and illegally, we're going to see in the coming months a crackdown on the gambling industry in the Philippines coming up.
Great.
And it causes problems for the host country. Let's put it that way.
Okay, thanks, David. I'm going to turn it over to Oz to say a final couple of words. Oz, are you there?
Well, yes, I'm here. Well, it was great listening to both of you. Thank you, David and Christina. It is 2 p.m. Eastern, so we're going to continue, as Christina indicated, with a few other China BRI related webinars, hopefully. So please stay tuned, and wait for our announcements, and hopefully I'm expecting, if not all of you, many of you to attend next time to our National District Export Council Conference in May 2021. All right, well, have a great day and thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.